In the heart of the scrapyard, where rusted metal and forgotten machinery were piled high, a once proud space vessel lay abandoned. It was an old military model, designed for deep space reconnaissance missions. Its sleek, angular frame had been battered by years of service in hostile environments, and now, after decades of glorious exploits, it was relegated to the scrap heap, forgotten, dismissed, and left to rot under the hot, unrelenting sun. The spaceship, designated Helios IV, had been one of the most advanced pieces of technology in its time. Equipped with top-tier weapons, shields, and an array of reconnaissance tools, it had played a pivotal role in several intergalactic missions. But now, it was nothing more than a relic. The wars it had fought in had long been over, the alliances it had once served disbanded, and the enemies it had faced were but dust in the annals of history. Among the mountain of junk and rusted hulls stood a lone figure, a human mechanic named Kyle. His hands were rough, his clothes stained with grease and oil, and his face weathered by the years of hard work spent in the scrap yards. Kyle had always had a gift for machines. He could take a piece of junk, no matter how broken, and turn it into something functional again. It wasn't much of a life, but it was the one he knew. For him, there was something satisfying about giving life to what others had discarded. As Kyle approached the Helios IV, he ran a hand over its pitted surface. The ship's once-pristine exterior had faded with time, but there was still something striking about it. A sense of power lingered in the frame, a reminder of what it had been. Despite its current state of decay, Kyle could see potential. It wasn't just a scrap of metal. It was a treasure chest, waiting to be unlocked. "Old girl, I think you've got one more mission in you," Kyle muttered to himself, pulling his tools from his belt. He had a reputation for bringing old tech back to life, but this ship was different. It was a challenge he couldn't resist. For weeks, Kyle worked tirelessly on the Helios IV. He tore into its systems, cleaned its engines, and carefully examined its weapons cache. The ship had seen better days, but Kyle's mechanical expertise breathed new life into it. The cockpit was stripped of its old, outdated systems and replaced with a more modern interface. The engines, while old, were still powerful enough to make the ship fly again, if given a little attention. He even managed to fix up its old plasma cannon, though he had to rig some parts together to make it work. In the depths of the scrapyard, Kyle had created a war machine out of what was once a forgotten relic. It wasn't long before the first test flight took place. The ship's thrusters roared to life, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air as the Helios IV lifted off the ground. The engines sputtered at first, but soon stabilized, and the ship rose into the sky. Kyle was grinning from ear to ear as he navigated the craft through the sky, the cockpit humming with the soft sound of old technology meshing with new. But as Kyle flew higher, a strange sense of unease began to settle over him. The Helios IV was flying smoothly, but his mind kept drifting back to the ship's original purpose. It had been built for war, for destruction, and that purpose had never truly been erased, even in its quiet, forgotten state. Now, Kyle had reawakened it, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to face the consequences of his actions. As he flew over the wastelands of Earth, the ruins of old cities below him, the radio crackled to life. It was an encrypted military frequency, one that hadn't been used in years. A voice, cold and commanding, came through the static. "Unidentified vessel. This is the Earth Defense Command. Identify yourself immediately." Kyle froze for a moment. He hadn't expected this. He had been careful to keep his identity hidden, but it seemed that the old war machines had their ways of communicating. He pressed a button on the console, switching the radio to a secure line. "This is Kyle, mechanic from the scrapyard," he said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "I just fixed up an old ship. Didn't think anyone would be paying attention." The voice on the other end paused for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was a new tone, one of recognition. "Do you realize what you've done?" the voice asked, almost incredulously. "That ship you're flying, Helios IV, was one of the most dangerous weapons the Earth Alliance ever built. It's not just a relic, it's a ticking time bomb. You've unwittingly reactivated a military-grade warship, and we cannot allow it to fall into the wrong hands." Kyle's eyes narrowed. The weight of the situation began to hit him. He had just turned an obsolete piece of military equipment into a weapon, and now the Earth Defense Command was aware of it. Worse, they were now concerned that someone else might target him to take the ship. He was in over his head. "They can't have it," Kyle muttered to himself. The ship, which had once served a noble purpose, had now become a tool of war once again. He wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of those who would use it for destruction. As he flew further from the scrapyard, Kyle began to think of a plan. If the Earth Defense Command was going to send forces after him, he would need to be prepared. He didn't know exactly who he was up against, but he did know this. He would not let anyone use the Helios IV for war again. It was his ship now, and he would decide how it would be used. That night, as the stars twinkled overhead, Kyle landed the ship in a secluded mountain range, far from any military installation or populated area. He spent the next several days reprogramming the ship's weapon systems and reworking its communications to avoid detection. The Helios IV would no longer be a tool of the military. It would be his for better or for worse. But just as he was finishing his modifications, a fleet of Earth Defense Command ships appeared on the horizon. They had tracked him down. Kyle's heart raced. He hadn't been prepared for a full-scale confrontation, but there was no turning back now. The battle that would ensue was inevitable. As the fleet approached, Kyle activated the Helios IV's engines and weapon systems. He didn't want to fight, but he had no choice. The ship had been born from war, and now it would be tested once more. The battle was fierce. The Helios IV's plasma cannon tore through enemy ships, while Kyle expertly navigated the ship through the mountainous terrain. The enemy forces had the advantage in numbers, but Kyle had the element of surprise. The Helios IV was fast, and its weapons were devastating. One by one, the Earth Defense Command ships fell to the might of the reactivated war machine. By the time the battle was over, Kyle was standing alone in the wreckage of the once proud fleet. His hands were still gripping the controls, but the adrenaline had begun to wear off. He had done what he set out to do. He had taken control of the ship and made it his own. But the cost had been high. In the silence that followed, Kyle's thoughts turned inward. The Helios IV had been a tool of war, and despite his best efforts to turn it into something else, he couldn't escape its origins. It had been built to destroy, and in the end, that was what it had done. With a heavy heart, Kyle piloted the Helios IV back to the scrapyard where it all began. He landed the ship in the same place where he had first discovered it. As the engines powered down and the ship fell silent, Kyle sat back in the cockpit, staring out at the wreckage of the war he had unwillingly revived. In the end, he realized that no matter how hard he tried to change the ship, some things could never be undone. The Helios IV had been born of destruction, and in its final moments, it had returned to that purpose. And as the dust settled, Kyle knew that he had become part of that legacy, forever bound to the war machine he had tried to tame.